I think that President Trump has really not fulfilled his responsibility as the President of the United States when it comes to Ukraine. All of his efforts have been to, in many ways, prop up Vladimir Putin, who has no interest in peace and only understands strong action. I think it is incumbent upon the president to impose sanctions, perhaps even secondary sanctions, on Russia, to say to Vladimir Putin that we're tired of this, that it's time for him to really come to the table and at least put a real ceasefire in place while a peace can be discussed.
Welcome to you, Wendy.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Can I just ask you something which has literally just been put into my hand? It's a statement from the Secretary of State in the Trump administration, Marco Rubio, and the headline is that it's an announcement of a visa restriction policy targeting foreign nationals who censor Americans. Have you come across this? Can you give us a sense of what this is about?
So I've just heard this myself, and it appears to be a shout out largely to Europe to say no efforts at content moderation on US social media platforms. I know that the European Union has a very different approach to regulation of the tech companies and of social media platforms. And I'm sure your listeners have noted that in the United States, the Trump administration has basically invited all the tech companies in. Most of them have provided funds for the inauguration and for other events. And a lot of this is targeted to ensure that tech companies and social media platforms don't have regulation, can say and do whatever they want whenever they want it.
Yeah, and what looks like a pretty clear threat to policymakers, presumably officials and politicians in Europe. Of course, in the European Union, we do know that the European Union has been looking at tech regulation. We know that the White House, the Trump administration, has been very unhappy about that. There has been consideration of the same thing here in the United Kingdom. And here we have a warning, fall foul of the way that we see all of this, and you'll be barred from America, where presumably quite a lot of these people may well want to visit and will do business.
Well, there seems to be an effort by the Trump administration to isolate my country from the rest of the world. The recent efforts around international students, not only at Harvard University, but at other universities and colleges as well. Secretary Rubio has said that there's a pause on giving visas to students until a new process is put in place to look at their social media to make sure there isn't anti-Semitism or support for terrorism. And this is all very concerning because having international students in the United States is part of our history, part of our legacy, part of the networks that we've built all around the world to ensure the safety, security, and prosperity of all of us.
And I'm going to be talking a bit later on to the former dean of Harvard Medical School, a revered medical institution there at, well, the university, which is one of the world's elite universities, number 4 in the Times Global list. You might argue as a former professor of Harvard, it deserves a higher place even than that. So I'm going to be talking certainly about that a little bit later on. Let me just ask you now about some of the areas that you covered when you were Deputy Secretary of State, because now we have, in the last 24 hours or so, seen President Trump tweeting about Ukraine and a message to Vladimir Putin. And it says, and I'm quoting, "If it weren't for me, says the president, lots of really bad things would have already happened to Putin. He's playing with fire." What did you make of that, Wendy?
Well, I think that President Trump has really not fulfilled his responsibility as the President of the United States when it comes to Ukraine. All of his efforts have been to, in many ways, prop up Vladimir Putin, who has no interest in peace and only understands strong action. I think it is incumbent upon the president to impose sanctions, perhaps even secondary sanctions, on Russia, to say to Vladimir Putin that we're tired of this, that it's time for him to really come to the table and at least put a real ceasefire in place while a peace can be discussed. I know that the UK and the rest of Europe have looked at increased sanctions, and I don't think that Putin understands words. He may stop bombarding Kyiv when President Trump says these things, but I think that's designed to make sure that President Trump delays any sanctions actions, and we're well past the point where the United States and all of us should have imposed harsher sanctions on Russia to get them to the negotiating table.
And a truly remarkable thing about this message from President Trump is surely that he's now saying here in terms that he has been the principal, the most important defender of Vladimir Putin against his critics and enemies. In other words, he's saying the quiet bit out loud.
Yes, it was quite, on one hand, it was astonishing, but to those of us who have been following President Trump, no surprise. It has appeared that he has been on Vladimir Putin's side, that horrifying Oval Office meeting with President Zelensky, a man who has led his country with resilience and toughness and stamina and constancy to just such a remarkable degree. President Trump has really dressed him down, tried to humiliate him until that very important tete-a-tete on the margins of the Pope's funeral, which seemed to put the relationship in a better place. But nonetheless, President Trump still continues to defend Vladimir Putin and not take the actions necessary to get him to the negotiating table.
I was discussing on the program just a moment ago the meeting between Chancellor Merz of Germany and President Zelensky of Ukraine in Berlin earlier today. And we see Germany's now saying it will help Ukraine, it will fund Ukraine, it will help Ukraine to develop longer range missiles. Still, though, we see President Trump not acting with further measures. There are dissenting voices in Washington, aren't there? Do you believe this position of President Trump will hold?
I hope it doesn't hold. There are nearly 80 co-sponsors in the United States Senate for tough action against Russia, led by Senator Lindsey Graham, a Republican. Whether, in fact, that will come to the floor of the Senate, whether it would ever pass the House and get to the president's desk, remains to be seen, but it is a kind of leverage, and I hope that President Trump takes it seriously and takes action in the next days. Otherwise, we will see continued bombardment with Shahed missiles against Kyiv and against Ukraine. UNICEF has really worried, as we all have, about all the thousands of children who have been taken to Russia, all of those who have died in Ukraine, all of the death and destruction. And it is way past the time when it should end.
Well, let me just ask you a bit about Iran, because you were, of course, the chief American negotiator in the Iran nuclear talks, 2013 to 2015. Do you support the president's efforts now to reach a negotiated agreement with Iran?
Well, of course, I much prefer a negotiated agreement to further actions that might include military action as well, which could quickly escalate into a very difficult situation and potential an Arab-Persian war. I'm glad that President Trump, with Steve Witkoff, is working on these negotiations. Witkoff's counterpart, Abbas Araghchi, was my counterpart during the Iran negotiations back in 2013, 14, 15. He is very smart. He has perfect English. He's very tough. I cannot imagine that anything will be announced in the next 24 to 48 hours, except a set of principles, perhaps, for an ongoing negotiation. President Trump said he could do Ukraine in a day. Of course, that's not possible. He then has said, let's do it in 2 months. That's not possible either. This is a very technical, very detailed negotiation. President Trump and the negotiators are under pressure to get this done, not only by our Congress, which wants complete dismantlement of the program, at least the Republicans do, but under pressure from Israel.
Mm.
which constantly has said they are ready to take military strikes against Iran. And although that would set back the program, it would not set it back for long. In a matter of years, Iran would likely recreate its program underground and in
Yes.
secret, because quite frankly, you can't bomb away knowledge.
And would it be possible, do you believe, to restrain Israel in this matter? Because the leader of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, is clearly very keen to attack, and maybe it's reasonable to argue that the world again is being played by Tehran.
Well, anything is possible in this very sort of Rubik's Cube process. I think that the Prime Minister of Israel would like to, in fact, take action. He cannot completely destroy all of the buildings, some of which are underground, without the support of the United States. President Trump has said he does not want to engage in military action. He's trying to withdraw from military action around the world. He's actually, for a man who says, fight, 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 win, 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 he is on retreat in many parts of the world from engaging and from having the United States be the world leader that we have been for so many years, even
Yes.
in a multipolar world. We've seen many meetings between Witkoff and Ron Dermer, the Minister for Strategic Purposes for Prime Minister Netanyahu. They are constant. Israel is very engaged with the United States, as they were with me and with the United States, with President Obama, Secretary Kerry, during the negotiations during the Obama administration.
Right.
I hope that we see a negotiated agreement and that we do not see war.
Okay. Now, just finally on Gaza, the pressure of international opinion against the military operation in Gaza by Israel, that's reaching a pitch. And as we speak now, there's a debate taking place at the United Nations in New York. Do you consider that President Biden, who you served, was he too permissive when it came to Israel for maybe too long?
Well, I think it's always very complicated given American politics and our historic support, understandably, for Israel. And I think we all were horrified by the October 7th assault on Israel by Hamas. That said, speaking of UNICEF, they said this morning over 50,000 children have died in Gaza.
Yes.
I cannot validate the accuracy of that number, but I can't imagine there's a person on the face of the earth that is not just completely undone by thinking about that. I was glad when President Trump said something about the suffering of Gazans that led to a trickle of food making its way into Gaza. But Prime Minister Netanyahu wants to hold on to his ultra-right coalition. That coalition wants to continue to pursue an assault in Gaza. This is not useful for Israel's security. This is not useful to ensure a horizon, a political horizon for the Palestinians, because without dignity and a political horizon for Palestinians, there will be no long-term security for Israel. There will be other generations of terrorists being created in this terrible time. So I would hope that the Prime Minister would, in fact, ensure that aid gets into Gaza, that he comes to a ceasefire, that remaining hostages, for heaven's sakes, are returned to Israel, and that we figure out a way forward. And that doesn't mean a Gaza Riviera in the way that President Trump has talked about it. It means safety, security for Israel over the long term, and a political horizon for peace, security, and prosperity as well for the Palestinians.
All right. Wendy Sherman, thank you for joining us. Wendy Sherman, the former U.S. Deputy Secretary of State.